Alrighty, so this is Decent We the People News, not attorney, not giving legal advice. Alright, anything I say or do is just my opinion only. Okay? Because I'm not a bar member, okay? Cannot give legal advice. It's educational purposes only, to let everybody know to use their Second Amendment, arm themselves with knowledge. Okay? And, no plan intended. This is about the Second Amendment anyway. That being said, uh, I did videos in the past, and this is kind of just a refresher. I have a little bit more subscribers, and it wasn't with the same guide, but you know, and then I did my own and wrote it out on a piece of paper. And I'm gonna probably stop a little bit here and there, but I want to get directly through this because he did a really good job. But I wanted to make my point as well. Number one, y'all, uh, shall not be infringed. You know, you guys got to look that up.
Does the Second Amendment protect private gun rights, or is it just a collective right? Do technological advancements make a right outdated? Is the phrase well-regulated synonymous with gun control? And who exactly is the militia? Also, should...
Oh, by the way, I used the second edition of the dictionary, Black Law Dictionary. I believe that's what the fathers used. And get that definition because that makes the true intent. Brewer said the original intent. Go back to the original intent. And if our fathers fought for this country, if they had machine guns, would they use it? Yes or no? That'd be a yes, people. They wanted to win. And if they go ahead and do the Second Amendment, would they change anything in there? Well, no, because they did not trust government, okay, at the time. So, and there we say, if they get out of control, we're allowed to abolish it. Well, we have rights for equal. Make up your next word on that. We have rights for equal against government coming at us.
Citizens be allowed to own nuclear weapons? In this video, I'll be answering these questions and more as we debunk 6 lies about the Second Amendment. And by the end of the video, you should have a much better idea of what the phrase well-regulated actually means. So let's get started. Anti-Second Amendment lie number 1. The Second Amendment does not protect private ownership. False. This lie can be heard throughout universities, spewed by mainstream media, posited by politicians, and then of course in the comment section of my videos. Let's take a look at some examples. USA Today said, there is no individual right to bear arms in the Bill of Rights. And then the New York Post said, law-abiding Americans have no unconditional right to firearms access. And then consider this quote, the sale, manufacture, and possession of handguns ought to be banned. We do not believe the Second Amendment guarantees an individual right to keep them. The Washington Post. Regardless of the source, this lie is promulgated by those who are uninformed by history and who lack basic reading comprehension skills. This lie is rooted in an ignorance for the prevalence of private arms ownership throughout history, an unwillingness to acknowledge the plain language of the Second Amendment.
Okay, this is one of the ones I'm going to stop. Well-regulated militia, comma, people. Being necessary to the security of the free state, comma. States have a right to call the militia to help back them up. Okay? Then it comes over here. The right of the people. The people. I am one of the people. I have a right. Okay? To keep. And bear means I'm allowed to carry it wherever I go for my self-protection. Arms, okay? Comma. Shall not be infringed. Shall not be infringed. Congress shall not be infringed. Judges, officers shall not be infringed. Wait a minute. People. Officers, one of the people. It's not complicated.
And a misunderstanding of certain terms within that article. I'll reserve the historical significance of private arms ownership for later in the video. And for now, I'm going to focus on the placement of the Second Amendment within the Bill of Rights, its language, and the meaning of certain terms like militia and well-regulated. After reading the plain language of the First, Second, Third, and Fourth Amendments, it's clear as day that they share a common theme. And that theme is the protection of the rights afforded to the people. Not to groups, not to the collective, not to the states, but to the people. And that's you and me. Imagine for a second that the First or Fourth Amendments were to be taken as a collective right. If this were the case, individual expression under the First Amendment would be drastically limited. Only speech or religious practices endorsed by the majority would be protected, and this would lead to marginalizing minority dissenting opinions. Additionally, if the Fourth Amendment were a collective right, the government could have broader latitude to conduct searches and seizures so long as it served the collective interest. Or if it pertained to a state's rights.
And you know, they're trying to do that as well, right? They're pulling away from that and taking our rights away from us, making up excuses for you know who on the other side. It's ridiculous.
This would be like saying that it only protected the right of the state legislators, the police, or the National Guard to assemble peacefully. And unfortunately, during COVID, we got a glimpse of this when the supposed greater good was prioritized over individual liberties. But I hope we all can agree that the First and Fourth Amendments protect the rights of the individual. So, as we consider the mere placement of the Second Amendment amongst its peers, at a minimum, we can draw a powerful inference that each of the first few amendments were cut from the same cloth. And to cut one of them out and suggest that it does not protect an individual right is illogical at best and nefariously disingenuous at worst. Okay, so next, let's look at the mere language of the Second Amendment.
Okay, we're going to stop right there. Now, you got to read the definition of individuals. You got to be real careful with that word. Okay, I'm stuck on one of the people because I don't want it to be misconstrued as a corporate individuals.
Regulated militia, being necessary to the security of a free state, the right of the people to keep and bear arms shall not be infringed. Consider the grammatical composition of this article. The first part gives us the why behind the second part. You see, many of the founding fathers were very wary of standing militaries. They believed that armed citizens were much more useful for protecting the security of a free state. And then, after providing us with the why, the amendment provides us with the individual right. The right of the people to keep and bear arms shall not be infringed. It would be like me saying, a well-functioning and honest media being necessary to the distribution of truth, the right of the people to own and use communication tools shall not be infringed. Now, in this hypothetical right, I'm not saying that we need a well-functioning and honest media as a prerequisite. That first part is simply stating the why it's important to protect the right to own and use communication tools. And to stretch this analogy a little bit further, it would also be foolish to interpret this as suggesting that the only communication tools that this would protect would be limited to those in existence during its ratification. Now, I guess I really shouldn't be surprised if the average person misunderstands the structure of the Second Amendment, because here's what former Chief Justice of the Supreme Court, Warren Burger, had to say. The need for a state militia was the predicate of the right guarantee, so as to protect the security of the state. So we can see here.
Just when you guys hear me talk about how the courts and all that do like a roustabout and bypassing certain things, that's a prime example right there. Misleading. Matter of fact, that's illegal. They're misleading the court. They're misleading the people on purpose. That's bad faith, unclean hands, and they're being in dishonor.
That even a Supreme Court judge has a hard time understanding a simple article. But not only did he fail at reading comprehension, he also failed to see that the article is concerned with the security of a free state, not simply the security of the state. And this is the crux of the issue and where most people are divided on the topic. Throughout the world, there are national constitutions that prioritize the security of the state. However, the citizens of these states are not free individuals, but subjects to the state. Let me restate that. If your country does not protect your individual right to speech, private arms ownership, and other rights found in the U.S. Constitution's Bill of Rights, then you are not a free citizen, but a subject to the state.
There you go. What is the statute of any of the amendments under supposed to be the Second Amendment, right? If you must get a permit. Well, if you got to get a permit, you're asking permission, and that makes you a subject. Under the 14th Amendment, it says citizens are subjects. Subjects. Under the 14th Amendment. And you could use it to your benefit, but they're already using it against you right from the start.
Singaporeans, the Chinese, the Japanese, the British, Canadians, Australians, Germans, and many other citizens around the world who are not afforded the right to arm themselves are not free men, but they are subjects to the government and the whims of those in power. Consider this quote: "The most foolish mistake we could possibly make would be to allow the subjected people to carry arms. History shows that all conquerors who have allowed their subjected people to carry arms have prepared their own fall."
At Lazy Boy, we're proud to support Coach Ann's Lazy Time.
I'll go ahead and rewind that back because we want to be clear on that behalf. And this commercial is long, actually. And it's just, it sucks that everything has gotten so twisted and misimplied and nobody reading. To know your basic rights, you must read your basic rights. It's not complicated. And quit going by hearsay. These judges that are making these rulings are hearsay and misleading.
Hitler understood that an armed populace who have allowed their afforded the right to arm themselves are not free men, but they are subjects to the government and the whims of those in power. Consider this quote:
And I want to pause that right there because it's very serious, y'all. Even for ones that is against it, it's fine. Be against it. But you don't have a right to take my rights. That is battery. That is a crime.
The foolish mistake we could possibly make would be to allow the subjected people to carry arms. History shows that all conquerors who have allowed their subjected people to carry arms have prepared their own fall. Adolf Hitler. Hitler understood that an armed populace would be much more difficult to tyrannize and haul off to gas chambers and concentration camps. So, Hitler exploited the Weimar Republic's gun registry to accomplish his Gun Control Act. Next, consider this. In Federalist 46, Madison discusses the risk posed by standing armies and emphasizes the importance of private arms ownership as a safeguard against the potential for government tyranny. Madison outlines how an armed populace serves as a critical balance against the power of the federal government and to deter against the misuse of a federal standing army. And then, in the 1866 Freedmen's Bureau Act, which is often considered the Siamese twin to the Civil Rights Act, it spoke of the full benefit of all laws and proceedings concerning personal liberty, personal security, and property, including the constitutional right to bear arms. But you might be left asking, okay, but what about this?
And just, again, you got to flash back and think about these things, right? What I always say. Never look straight forward. Always look around you to be able to protect yourself by any means necessary, y'all. Think outside the box. Quit going by hearsay. Do your own research. Judges, attorney, me, this guy. We're all hearsay. Do your own research.
And we'll get to this in the third anti-Second Amendment lie. But first, let's address another lie. And that is anti-Second Amendment lie number 2. The Second Amendment doesn't protect military-grade weapons and is outdated due to technological advancements.
Series 4, deatomizer. That's what I'm talking about. Noisy crickets.
Many who believe this lie claim that muskets were the most advanced weapons in 1791 when the amendment was ratified, and that the Founding Fathers had no foresight about weapons innovation.
Did you see that?
Thus, right there was my point of view, right there. If they had it, would they have used it? And that would be yes.
Muskets he had. Magnificent. Hand me the quill so I can draw them before I forget.
Contrary to popular belief, the musket was not the most advanced weapon when the Second Amendment was ratified. There were, in fact, repeating rifles that were capable of firing multiple shots without the need for reloading. And this one might surprise you, but in 1718, a London lawyer by the name of James Puckle invented the Puckle gun, aka the defense gun. This gun worked in a similar manner to how a revolver worked and could fire 9 rounds, one after the other, before needing to be reloaded. So no, the musket was not the most advanced weapon during 1791. However, it was one of the most common in use during that time, just as the AR-15 is today. And next, I want to dispel the absolutely erroneous idea that the Founding Fathers had no foresight for weapons innovation.
The right of the people to keep and bear arms shall not be infringed. What if someone made a gun that could shoot, say, 50 people in 30 seconds?
And in my opinion, this fallacy is rooted in the flawed thinking that people from long ago are that much different from the people of today. This line of thinking ignores that people of any era understand and have an awareness of their frame of reference along the timeline of human history. And this very awareness gives each generation the ability to imagine, predict, and anticipate potential advancements in technology. And the authors of the U.S. Constitution were very educated in the history of warfare and technological advancements of weapons. And they would have surely known that the musket was simply another point along the continuum of weapons technology. It's silly and laughable to assume that the men responsible for the single greatest constitution in the history of nations lacked the foresight to see that the musket would be to some future weapon what the bow was to the musket. And bear in mind that making a right dependent on technological advancements opens the door to reevaluating every other right. Take the freedom of speech. One could easily argue that advancements in communications technology would be much more surprising to the founders than advancements in small arms tech. Imagine if you were able to go back in time with something like the AR-15 and then the iPhone.
Whoa, this is heavy. I held an AR-15 in my hand. It is as heavy as 10 boxes. There's that word again, heavy.
I guarantee that the technology inside this iPhone would be far more impressive to someone like Ben Franklin. If you were to simply demonstrate the ability of an iPhone to video call with multiple people all over the world, Benjamin Franklin would be far more amazed by that technology than a gun that can simply reload itself.
Please, stop!
Especially when you consider that self-loading guns already existed at that time. So with this in mind, if you're going to posit that rights are dependent on technology, then you must also concede that the First Amendment is much more susceptible to government regulations. Now, if you want to make the case that 18th century scientists could not perceive the invention of the atom bomb, then keep watching, because I'll cover this towards the end of the video. But for now, here's a quote from Justice Clarence Thomas. Quote, "The Second Amendment extends prima facie to all instruments that constitute bearable arms, even those that were not in existence at the time of the founding." So no, our rights are not only applicable to the era in which they were ratified in, or abrogated by technology, but they are temporally and technologically independent. So next, let's address the most overused lie. Anti-Second Amendment, lie number 3. Well-regulated means government regulation, gun control, and or the militia is referring to the National Guard or police. In a statement filed by 52 professors and historians in a Second Amendment lawsuit, they claimed the Second Amendment protects only the right to bear arms for the purpose of service in the militia, and not firearms ownership unrelated to militia service. And then the ACLU undermined their credibility for protecting civil liberties when they said that the individual right to bear arms applies only to the preservation or efficiency of a well-regulated militia. Except for lawful police and military purposes, The possession of weapons by individuals is not constitutionally protected. This lie is sort of
Does that remind you of Nazi and other states as well nowadays?
tied to the first lie that it doesn't protect the right to private ownership, and it stems from the confusion about whom the founders believed were the militia, in addition to a misunderstanding about the meaning of well-regulated. But before we get into defining legal terms, consider these quotes regarding how we should interpret a legal document like the Constitution and its Bill of Rights. And if you prefer to skip ahead, then skip ahead to this timestamp. Thomas Jefferson, skilled with uncanny precognition, commented very clearly on how the Constitution should be read when he said, "On every question of construction, let us carry ourselves back to the time when the Constitution was adopted. Recollect the spirit manifested in the debates, and instead of trying what meaning can be squeezed out of the text or invented against it, conform to the probable one which was passed." And as James Madison stated, "I entirely concur in the priority of resorting to the sense in which the Constitution was accepted and ratified by the nation. In that sense alone, it is the legitimate Constitution." What a metamorphosis would be produced in the code of law if all its ancient phraseology were to be taken in its modern sense. And then,
And we can actually extend that to what? Property tax. Your private property. Now, it may not be good for business tax, okay? I'll just linger there, right? That right there has got profit, income. But your private property has zero income. And I would say that the fathers, if they believed in taxes at all, that would be one of the amendments. Especially if it was on private property, which they did not want on there. Why? Because they had private property. They didn't even like the Boston tea tax.
according to Chief Justice Howard Taft, they, the framers of our Constitution, expressed themselves in terms of the common law, confident that they could be short and easily understood. And then one of the original Supreme Court justices, James Wilson, declared, "The first and governing maxim in the interpretation of a statute is to discover the meaning of those who made it." And then finally, as Justice Joseph Story, who was appointed by James Madison,
Right there, right? It must be clear and concise on the statutes and which constitution it must be married to, y'all. It's got to coincide with one another. They can have the statute, and I still don't even believe in the statute, but they can have the statute. But mostly the statute is supposed to apply only to government officials. It wasn't really supposed to apply to the people.
stated, "The first and fundamental rule in the interpretation of all documents is to construe them according to the sense of the terms and the intentions of the parties." Man, that was an exhaustive list, and if you listened to that whole thing, then I applaud you and thank you for bearing with me. But now that we've covered the importance of interpreting a legal document through its original meaning, let's now acknowledge the reality of how certain words lose their meaning over time. For instance, consider the word gentleman. And if you've read C.S. Lewis, then you should be familiar with this example. But the original meaning of the term gentleman was to describe someone who had a coat of arms and owned property. And when you called someone a gentleman, you were saying nothing of that person's character or temperament.
Done deal. Thank you very much, sir. You're a gentleman and a scholar. Oh, I'm sorry. Okay, I'm sorry. My mistake. That was a woman I was talking to. So.
In the original meaning, you were simply stating a fact like you would be doing today if you called someone a homeowner. A gentleman could have been a jerk, could have been a womanizer, or could have led a generally unscrupulous lifestyle. And this would have not contradicted the claim that they were a gentleman because it was not a measure of character. However, in the present day, the term has essentially lost its meaning and therefore any usefulness at all. Now the word gentleman is synonymous with words like nice, kind, polite, generous, etc. Now hopefully you're still with me after that exhaustive setup, but I wanted to drive the point home that interpreting a legal document like the Bill of Rights must be done in the context of when it was written and with an understanding of what the words meant at that time. So with this in mind, let's see if we can interpret the original meaning of well-regulated. Jack Ricot, I hope that's how you pronounce it.
Balake.
My name's Blake.
He's a Stanford professor of political science and law, and he explains that well-regulated in the 18th century tended to be something like well-organized, well-armed, well-disciplined. It means the militia was in an effective shape to fight. And then in Federalist 29, Hamilton...
Which also means well-regulated, that was cleaned and maintained. That way it's in good working order when you're called upon and don't have no issues out on the fields.
outlines the meaning of well-regulated militia for what he refers to as the people at large. About halfway through Federalist 29, Hamilton explains that little more can be expected than to have the people properly armed and equipped, and that they should assemble once or twice in the course of a year. Now you might be saying, see, the militia is supposed to be trained regularly, be well organized and disciplined, and I would agree. However, I would also refer you back to my honest media analogy. While it's true that having a well-functioning and honest media is necessary for the dissemination of truth, this should not be a requirement to own communication tools and other printing devices or to speak freely. Now let's move on to determine who is the militia. If you were to ask most contemporary Americans who they believe is the modern militia, many would guess that the state or national guards would fill that role, or maybe even the local police. However, the 18th century definition of militia was much different, and they would have considered any type of armed government agency as either a select corps or a select militia. And these groups would have been viewed by the founders with the same disdain as they had for standing armies. And even under federal law, the citizenry is divided into two subsets. You have the organized militia, which is composed of the National Guard, and then you have the unorganized militia, which is composed of all able-bodied males between the ages of 17 and 45. So
Yeah, and read your state on that, because some of it's 60 and all that. Texas got rid of theirs, unorganized militia. I guess it got lost in the transcript of the law, but as of today, Texas don't even have that.
Here we can see that the militia is not the National Guard. The militia is composed of the body of people, and this is supported throughout the Federalist Papers. Consider this quote by James Madison that follows, nearly identical to the Second Amendment. The right of the people to keep and bear arms shall not be infringed. A well-regulated militia, composed of the body of the people, trained to arms, is the best and most natural defense of a free country. Notice how he said the defense of a free country and not the defense of the state. And then this by George Mason. I ask, who are the militia? They consist of the whole people, except a few public officers. So here we are told that public office may actually preclude someone from being a member in the militia, which undermines the assertion that the militia mentioned in the Second Amendment is state-run. Like we discussed earlier, over time, the definitions of some terms evolve, and sometimes to the point where the term's original meaning is completely lost. And some people are trying to do that with a definition of a woman, but that's for another video. But it's important that we use the original definition when reading and interpreting legal documents. And that brings us to the end of the 3 anti-Second Amendment lies. And next I'll be covering 3 pro-Second Amendment lies. And based on my 6 lies about the AR-15 video, I'm sure to anger just as many ideologues on the right as I have on the left, but oh well, let's keep going. Pro-Second Amendment, lie number 1. I am the militia.
Take a good look at the face of the militia.